For over 3,000 years, the land of Israel has stood at the center of world history, religion, and prophecy. From Abraham to the modern state, Israel's story is not just national, it's divine. God made unbreakable promises to this land and the people who carry his name. But what exactly is Israel's destiny, according to the Bible? The story of Israel doesn't begin with the modern state. It doesn't even begin with the name Israel. It begins with humanity itself, in the earliest chapters of civilization, some 4,000 years ago. Long before temples, kings, or prophets, there was a man named Noah, spared from a global catastrophe, not just to survive, but to restart. And from one of his descendants would come a man named Abram, later called Abraham, the one who would become the father of a new nation. Around 2000 BCE, Abraham is called by God to leave his homeland in Ur, modern-day Iraq, journeying through lands that would one day become the heart of Israel. A promise was made to him. His descendants would inherit a land, a people, and a blessing. It's a call that changed history forever. Fast forward to Egypt, some 600 years later. The descendants of Abraham had become slaves under the rule of the Pharaoh. For 400 years they lived in oppression, but their identity as a people, as a nation, remained intact. The stage was set for their deliverance. Around 1300 BCE, a man named Moses, raised in Pharaoh's household but called by God to lead, stepped into history. With the cries of an enslaved people in his heart, Moses confronted the most powerful empire of the ancient world and demanded their freedom. Through plagues, miracles, and divine intervention, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt in what is known as the Exodus. This pivotal moment in around 1290 BCE would define the very essence of Israel's identity. But there was more. At Mount Sinai, in the heart of the desert, Moses received the covenant, a set of laws and commandments that would bind Israel to God. This was no mere agreement. It was a divine identity for a nation. It was here, in the wilderness, that Israel would become the people of God. Moses would not live to see the land of promise. Upon his death around 1260 BCE, leadership passed to Joshua, who led the Israelites into Canaan, a land already inhabited by powerful nations. But Israel's claim to this land was not based on military might or political strategy, but on the divine promise that had been given centuries earlier. Joshua's conquest, beginning in the late 13th century BCE, saw the fall of cities like Jericho, marking the beginning of a long period of struggle and survival. Israel's emergence as a distinct people, not just in physical territory but in worship and identity, was marked by their establishment of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized God's presence with them. Over the next several centuries, Israel went through cycles of prosperity and decline. By the 11th century BCE, the Israelites demanded a king, and the monarchy was born. Saul became Israel's first king, followed by the reign of David in 1000 BCE. Under David's rule, Jerusalem became the political and spiritual capital of the Israelites. David's son Solomon took the throne in 970 BCE. And during his reign, the first temple in Jerusalem was built, a physical representation of Israel's covenant with God. This was Israel's golden age, with prosperity and peace under the reign of Solomon. But even in their greatest moment, the nation was always aware of one thing. Their identity was rooted not in earthly power, but in their divine calling. The glory of Israel's early days was fleeting. The kingdom would eventually split, and many would be exiled. Yet in all the trials and triumphs, one thing remained constant. Israel was never just another kingdom. Its history was written into the divine plan, a plan that was unfolding over centuries, with the nation of Israel called to something greater than any earthly ruler could understand. Through every high and low, one thing remained. Israel's story was never random. It was always part of a larger plan, and that plan had only just begun. If Israel's rise was marked by divine promise, Its scattering was marked by rebellion, invasion, and survival against all odds. After Solomon's death in 930 BCE, the Kingdom of Israel split into two. The northern kingdom retained the name Israel, and the southern kingdom became known as Judah. This division weakened the nation politically, militarily, and spiritually. In 722 BCE, the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the mighty Assyrian Empire. 10 of the 12 tribes were taken into captivity, scattered across the Assyrian Empire, and effectively lost to history. These became known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah held on for another century and a half, but not without warning. Prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel repeatedly warned the people, "Turn back to God or face destruction." But the warnings went unheeded. In 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Jerusalem. The city was destroyed. The first temple, Solomon's temple, was reduced to rubble, and thousands of Jews were taken into exile in Babylon. This was the first major Jewish diaspora. In exile, the Jewish people did something extraordinary. Rather than dissolving into the culture around them, they preserved their identity. They wrote, they remembered, and they worshipped, even without a temple. By 538 BCE, under the Persian king Cyrus the Great, a remnant was allowed to return and rebuild Jerusalem. A second temple was completed by 516 BCE, a symbol of restoration, but never quite the same as the first. Over the centuries that followed, Israel became a pawn in the hands of empire after empire, Persia, Greece, and finally Rome. Each brought foreign gods, customs, and political pressure, but Israel survived. In 70 CE, tragedy struck again. The Roman Empire, in response to a Jewish revolt, besieged Jerusalem. The Second Temple, the very heart of Jewish worship, was destroyed. Over 1 million Jews perished. The survivors were scattered throughout the Roman Empire. This was no temporary exile. This was a scattering that would last nearly 2,000 years. In 135 CE, after another failed revolt under Simon Bar Kokhba, the Romans renamed the land Palestina, after the Philistines, in an intentional move to erase Jewish identity from the region. From that moment on, the Jewish people were a people without a land. They lived across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, often persecuted, often forced into ghettos, often treated as outsiders. Yet they endured. They kept their traditions, their language, and their hope alive. The hope that one day they would return to Zion. Through medieval pogroms, crusades, and expulsions, through the horrors of the Spanish Inquisition and the ghettos of Eastern Europe, the Jewish identity survived. And even as centuries passed, their longing never faded. "Next year in Jerusalem," a phrase traditionally said at the end of the Passover Seder and Yom Kippur, wasn't just a phrase. It was a heartbeat passed down through generations. For thousands of years, the Jewish people carried a destiny bigger than any empire that tried to crush them. They had been scattered, yes, but never erased, because the story of Israel, even in exile, was never over. In fact, the next chapter was already being written, and it would shake the entire world. The story of Israel took an impossible turn, a return that defied every historical precedent. For most nations, exile is the end, but for Israel, exile was only an intermission. The seeds of return were planted long before the world saw them sprout. In the late 1800s, as pogroms raged across Eastern Europe and anti-Semitism intensified, Jewish thinkers began to see the solution not just as survival, but sovereignty. This was the beginning of Zionism, a movement that declared, the Jewish people need a homeland. And not just any homeland, but the homeland, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In 1897, at the First Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, Theodor Herzl stated, "At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. He believed it would take 50 years. He was nearly right. At the time, the land known as Palestine was under Ottoman rule, arid, sparsely populated, and neglected. But Jewish pioneers began arriving, buying land legally, building farms, planting trees, draining swamps, and reviving the Hebrew language, a language that hadn't been spoken conversationally in over 2,000 years. Then came the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. The British took control of Palestine under the British Mandate, 1920 to 1948, and tensions between Jews and Arabs escalated. Still, immigration continued, but then the world shifted. Between 1939 and 1945, the Holocaust claimed the lives of 6 million Jews. Entire communities were erased. The very heart of European Jewry was reduced to ashes. The Jewish question had turned into the Jewish catastrophe. And with that horror came global reckoning. The world now understood that statelessness had a cost, and the Jewish people had paid it in blood. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. The Jewish community accepted the offer. The Arab leaders rejected it. And so, on May 14, 1948, in a small building in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion stood before the world and proclaimed, "The State of Israel is established." For the first time in over 2,000 years, the Jewish people had a sovereign state in their ancient homeland. The world watched in disbelief. How could a people exiled for millennia suddenly resurrect their ancient nation in the very same land their ancestors once walked? But the celebration lasted barely a day. On May 15, 1948, 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded. It was Israel's first war, and everyone thought it would be their last. But they survived. They didn't just survive, they won. And yet, one piece was still missing: Jerusalem. When Israel declared independence in 1948, Jerusalem was split. The West became Israeli. The East, including the Old City and the Temple Mount, was controlled by Jordan. For 19 years, Jews were forbidden from visiting their holiest site. But in 1967, during the Six-Day War, something happened that stunned the world. In just 6 days, Israel not only defended itself, but took control of the Sinai, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and, for the first time in over 2,000 years, unified Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, was once again under Jewish sovereignty. The Western Wall, all that remained of the Second Temple, echoed with Jewish prayers after 2 millennia of silence. But even now, the city remains complicated. Though Israel controls Jerusalem politically, the Temple Mount itself is administered by an Islamic Waqf. Jews can visit, but they are forbidden to pray openly. The most sacred site in Judaism remains a place of tension. Jerusalem has become the most contested city on earth, claimed by 3 religions, fought over by countless empires, and yet it endures. Why? Because Jerusalem is more than a city. It's a symbol, a lightning rod for prophecy, and a time bomb in global geopolitics. In just decades, Israel transformed from a desert outpost into a modern powerhouse, militarily, technologically, and spiritually. Hebrew was revived, the land was cultivated. Jewish refugees from around the world, from Iraq to Ethiopia, from Yemen to Russia, returned. It was as if history was rewinding. The scattered tribes were coming home. Against all odds, against every empire, exile, and attempt to erase them, they were back. But even with a nation restored and a flag flying, Israel's destiny is not complete. Because in the biblical narrative and in the hearts of millions, Israel's return is not just about geography, it's about purpose. The question now shifts from how they returned to why. And the answer lies in what's still to come. The rebirth of Israel wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a collision course. Since 1948, Israel has fought for its survival in war after war, from the War of Independence to the Yom Kippur War, the Lebanon conflicts, Gaza operations, and more. But beyond these battles lies something larger, something darker. The prophetic texts speak of a future war, a war not just of nations but of destinies. Some call it the War of Gog and Magog, others Armageddon. But they all agree, The focal point is Israel. We already see the pieces moving. Iran funds Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south. Syria remains unstable. Russia looms in the background, wielding influence in the region. Turkey, too, grows more vocal in its ambitions. And then there's Jerusalem, a city that could ignite a global firestorm with a single policy change, a single bullet, a single spark. The world is watching, and the pressure is building. In biblical prophecy, these alliances are not random. They're foreshadowed. Nations from the north, Persia, Cush, put all converging against Israel. While scholars debate the timing and identity of those nations, the pattern is clear. Israel's existence will provoke hostility. And that hostility won't be merely political. It will carry a spiritual charge. Some prophecies describe a future temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem, a controversial act that could ignite religious conflict on an unimaginable scale. Others speak of a global leader rising during this turmoil, offering peace, but ultimately leading many astray. These aren't just ancient warnings. Even today, headlines echo with hints of these themes: alliances forming, threats exchanged, Jerusalem debated at the UN. The coming conflict, whether metaphor or military, spiritual or political, is central to Israel's prophetic destiny. And Israel? It stands alone, just as prophesied. And while the world prepares for conflict, the question isn't if it will happen. The question is, when? For thousands of years, the borders of Israel have shifted with the tides of history. Empires have risen and fallen over its hills and valleys, and yet, the Bible speaks of a day when the land will no longer be contested, a day when Israel will dwell securely, not within today's narrow borders, but within the full expanse of the land God swore to Abraham. In Genesis 15:18, God makes a promise. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. This is a vision far greater than the lines drawn on today's maps, stretching from the edge of Egypt, through Gaza, across Jordan, into Syria, and eastward to the lands of Iraq. Let's take a look at each region separately. Along Israel's southern coastline lies a strip of land that has been a flashpoint for millennia: Gaza. Once home to the Philistines, it was the stage for the battles of Samson, the stronghold of ancient enemies, and the gateway for invading armies from the sea. Today, it is one of the most densely populated and politically volatile regions in the world. But the prophet Zephaniah saw Gaza's future in a very different light. The land by the sea will become pastures, having wells for shepherds and pens for flocks. That land will belong to the remnant of the people of Judah. There they will find pasture. Zephaniah 2:6-7. It's a stunning contrast, from war to peace, from barricades to open fields. Zephaniah's vision is not of Gaza as a contested territory, but as part of Judah's inheritance in the Messianic age, transformed into a place of life and abundance. Historically, Gaza was one of the 5 cities of the Philistines, enemies of Israel whose oppression is recorded throughout the Old Testament. In the future, Scripture suggests the cycle of hostility will end, replaced by reconciliation under the reign of the Messiah. Zechariah 9:6-7 even hints that the people of Gaza will one day be integrated into God's people. I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. He too shall be a remnant for our God. The imagery is powerful. Not only will the land be restored, but some of its people may become part of the redeemed remnant, standing side by side with the very nation they once opposed. In the prophetic map of the future, Gaza is not an isolated, contested enclave. It is Judah's open pasture land, a symbol of peace reclaimed from the shadow of war. Shifting to the east of the Jordan River lies a rugged and ancient land, a place of deep valleys, windswept plateaus, and fortified cities carved into the rock. Today, it's known as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, but in the Bible, these lands bore names that echo through prophecy: Gilead, Moab, and Ammon. Obadiah 1:19 foretells a time when Benjamin shall possess Gilead, a clear reference to Israel expanding eastward beyond the Jordan. This isn't just one isolated prophecy. Isaiah 11:14 says that in the Messianic age they will swoop down on the slopes of Philistia to the west. Together they will plunder the people to the east. They will lay hands on Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites will be subject to them. These are all territories in what is now modern Jordan. Historically, parts of Jordan were home to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, portions of Israel's inheritance that lay on the east side of the Jordan. In the future, prophecy suggests this land will once again be reunited with Israel, not as occupied territory, but as part of a restored and unbroken covenant promise. North of Israel's modern boundaries lie lands that have shaped its history for thousands of years: the green hills of Lebanon, the snow-capped heights of Mount Hermon, and the fertile plateaus of Bashan in what is now southern Syria. These regions were once within Israel's sphere during the reigns of David and Solomon, forming a northern crown of beauty and strategic strength. Ezekiel 47:15-20 describes the future northern border of a restored Israel, reaching well beyond today's Golan Heights into southern Lebanon and Syria. The Golan itself, part of ancient Bashan, was known for its rich pastures and fortified cities. Cities Israel once conquered under Moses and Joshua. Bashan is repeatedly mentioned in Scripture as a place of strength and abundance, but also as a symbol of pride that will be humbled before the Lord. Above Bashan towers Mount Hermon, a landmark visible for miles. Psalm 133 celebrates it as a place of blessing. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. This mountain marked Israel's ancient northern limit, yet in prophecy, its slopes and surrounding lands could once again be firmly within the covenant borders. Isaiah 17 delivers a striking vision of Damascus, the heart of Syria, reduced to ruins, signaling a dramatic shift in the region's future. Jeremiah 49 speaks of Hamath and Arpad, Syrian strongholds, trembling at what's to come. Together, these prophecies hint at both judgment and eventual restoration of these territories into Israel's inheritance. In the future, the northern frontier of Israel may stretch from Tyre and Sidon on Lebanon's coast, across the fertile plains of Bashan, past Mount Hermon, and deep into southern Syria. These are not random expansions. They're pieces of the land God promised to Abraham, part of a covenant that prophecy says will be fully realized in the Messianic age. From the high passes of Hermon to the deep valleys of Lebanon, these lands will one day form Israel's secure northern border, a crown of mountains, forests, and fields, restored to peace under the reign of the Messiah. Far to the east, beyond the Jordan, beyond the deserts of modern Syria and Iraq, flows a river that has shaped civilizations for millennia, the Euphrates. It is one of the great rivers named in Genesis, a cradle of human history and a boundary marker set by God himself for the inheritance of Abraham's descendants. In Genesis 15:18, God's covenant words are unmistakable. To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. This means that in the fullest expression of God's promise, Israel's eastern boundary reaches hundreds of miles beyond its current limits, across the arid plains of Syria, through the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, and into lands that today belong to Iraq. In ancient times, Israel's influence occasionally touched this frontier. Under King David, the kingdom extended to the Euphrates in moments of strength, 2 Samuel 8:3. This was not conquest for conquest's sake. It was a partial glimpse of the covenant boundaries God had set. But prophecy speaks of a time when these boundaries will not merely be touched, they will be fully possessed. In the Messianic kingdom, when war is stilled and the nations are at peace, Israel's eastern border may run all the way to this mighty river. The Euphrates also plays a dramatic role in the end times. Revelation 16:12 speaks of the river drying up to prepare the way for the kings of the east, a sign tied to the final movements before Christ's return. This tells us that the Euphrates is not just a geographical feature, it is a prophetic stage, a line of both separation and connection between Israel and the vast nations beyond. In the restored kingdom, the Euphrates would mark the farthest reach of Israel's eastern lands, territory that today includes parts of Iraq's fertile plains and Syria's eastern provinces. This is a breathtaking expanse, covering not just a few additional miles, but entire regions that have never known peace in living memory. If these prophecies are layered together, the map begins to change before our eyes. The Israel of the future could include Gaza and the coastal plains, the hills of Samaria, the heights of Gilead, the valleys of Lebanon, parts of Syria, and land stretching all the way to the Euphrates. One day, the boundaries of Israel may not be dictated by peace talks or political pressure, but by the unshakable word of God. In that day, the land will rest, the people will flourish, and Jerusalem will shine as the eternal capital of a kingdom that will never fall again. As history barrels toward its final chapters, the story of Israel converges with one of the most profound and controversial prophecies in all of Scripture, the return of the Messiah. For millennia, Jewish people have longed for the arrival of their promised Redeemer, the one who would deliver them from oppression, establish peace, and reign from Jerusalem. For Christians, that Messiah is Jesus, who once walked the streets of Galilee, was crucified in Jerusalem, and ascended with the promise that he would come again in what's called the Second Coming. Prophets spoke of a day when the skies would split, when the Mount of Olives would be shaken, and when the Messiah would return to establish his kingdom in Jerusalem. In this vision of the future, the people of Israel, many of whom have long been secular or skeptical, will experience a spiritual awakening. The veil will be lifted, and the one they once called stranger, they will call Messiah. The return of the Messiah doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's preceded by deception, war, betrayal, and great shaking. The Antichrist will rise. Nations will gather against Israel. And yet, just when it seems like all is lost, the skies break open. The true king returns, not as a suffering servant this time, but as a conquering king. When the dust settles, when wars cease, kingdoms fall, and prophecies are fulfilled, Israel's role is not just historic or political, it's eternal. In the final vision of the Bible, we're transported to a scene that's both mysterious and breathtaking. A new Jerusalem, descending from heaven, not rebuilt by human hands but crafted by God himself. This city isn't just a symbol of hope. It's the culmination of every promise, every covenant, every tear-streaked prayer uttered by prophets, pilgrims, and the persecuted throughout time. And at the center of this city, not a temple made of stone, but the very presence of God and the Lamb. No more war, no more division, just restoration of humanity, of creation, of the relationship between God and his people. Israel's destiny isn't simply survival, it's glory. The ancient nation that once wandered the desert, that faced exile, oppression, and rebirth, will become the centerpiece of a renewed creation, not because of its perfection, but because of its calling. And so, the story continues, not on the stage of modern politics alone, but in the hearts of those watching, waiting, and wondering, what is my place in this grand design? Because if Israel has a destiny, so do you. As we've seen, the biblical destiny of Israel is a story woven through history, geography, and prophecy, a story that continues to unfold today. From the ancient covenant with Abraham to the promised restoration of a new Jerusalem, Israel stands at the center of a divine plan that stretches beyond time and space. Whether you view these events through the lens of faith, history, or prophecy, one thing remains clear: Israel's journey is far from over. It is a testament to endurance, hope, and the unfolding mystery of God's purpose for humanity. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the biblical destiny of Israel. If you found this exploration insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay connected for more deep dives into prophecy, history, and faith. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the signs and wonders that shape our world.